Dear ladies and gentlemen, it is our great pleasure to be able to present to you today the findings of our archaeometallurgical experiment with the use of the Lusatian socketed axes. By reconstructing the casting process and experimenting with the use of these axes, we have obtained a wealth of data that enables us to reconstruct the biographies of these objects, from casting to deposition. Our research demonstrates that a comprehensive database of traces obtained from replicas is necessary for accurately interpreting the biographies of Lusatian socketed axes and understanding the factors that influence their deposition. Socketed axes are one of the most common types of artifacts from the European Late Bronze Age. A local variant known as Lusatian socketed axes, distinguished by the characteristic ornamentation, has been the subject of our interest for many years. For over a decade, we have been working on creating a database of traces of production and use ware that have been found on the surfaces of artifacts from various contexts, such as graves, hoards, and settlements. To better understand and interpret recorded traces of production and use ware, we conducted a series of experiments with replicas of Lusatian socketed axes that focus on production and use. The main goal of the experiment was to identify and catalogue characteristic use ware that appears on bronze axes, as well as define its differences depending on the type of work those objects were used for. Next, an attempt was made to compare the use ware registered on the experimental specimens with the use ware observed on artifacts. The features of the characteristic use ware created while working on different materials, such as fresh wood, dry wood, bone, and softened antler, were described and their distinguishability was evaluated. The secondary goal was to become familiar with the detailed technical aspects of making and using axes, which will allow for a better understanding of the process and more precise formulation of research questions in the future. For the purpose of this experiment, 4 replicas of bronze axes with a socket and a loop were prepared. They were based on an artifact from the collective deposit of metal objects from a village nearby Toruń. Such specimens belong to the so-called Średmiejście type, variation E, and are dated to the Late Bronze Age. Due to the fact, the research questions focused on use-related issues and the resulting ware, modern production methods were used to obtain replicas with similar characteristics. The technology of lost wax casting covered with casting plaster was used. The mold was fired under conditions recommended by the manufacturers, and poured with liquid metal when its temperature reached 600 to 650 degrees Celsius. Replicas were made of tin bronze with a 10% alloying additive. To increase the usefulness of the experimental replicas, the working edge was cold forged 3 times, each time preceded by annealing. Strengthening and shaping of the blade through forging was a common practice noted on many historical specimens, including the one that served as the prototype for the created replicas. The working edges of the experimental axes were sharpened, using fine-grained sandstone with 2 different grain sizes. They were ground longitudinally towards the working edge. The axe replicas were mounted on a wooden handle based on a find from Must Farm. The longitudinal handle was made of ash, while the transverse element, on which the bronze blade was directly mounted, was made of maple. To strengthen the handle and prevent the blade from falling off, strips of rawhide were threaded through the axe loop. Before starting to work with the experimental specimens, visible traces on their surfaces were documented. Each of the axes was used to work on a different material. Fresh wood, dry wood, softened deer antler, and bone. It was assumed that the work would last a minimum of 3 hours, or until the working edge was destroyed, making further work impossible. The possibility of replacing the axe handle was taken into account, as it was not the subject of the described experiment. Sharpening of the replicas was abandoned to avoid destroying the emerging traces, and to present a clear picture of the character of the tool use. Hardwood. The axes were used to cut through a dry oak log. The work was carried out with both hands, using moderate force and attempting to make precise strikes. Occasionally, harder strikes were made. The total work time was above 3 hours. From the very beginning, the tool seemed insufficiently sharp, but this discomfort did not deepen with the progress of work. The narrow blade showed a high penetration factor and allowed for the task to be completed. Wet wood. During work with this material, the axes were used to cut freshly felled softwood logs of various diameters, mainly alder, willow, and hazel. The work proceeded similarly to the description on the previous slide. The axe worked efficiently. It penetrated the wood structure without problems. However, the problematic tendency to wedge the blade arose from its small width and longitudinal cross-sectional shape. The total work time was over 3 hours. No noticeable blunting of the tool was recorded. Bone. The course of work differed from the one described above. Light blows were used at various angles, as well as a few stronger strikes. The result was a quick emergence of visible deformations on the blade, which after several minutes of use, made further efficient use of the axe impossible. Softened antler. Fragments of a deer antler soaked for 3 weeks in water were used as material. The task was to remove the top layer of the antler called purling, fragment it, and shape it. Numerous, quick, and light blows predominated, usually at a fairly sharp angle. Observations and sensations during work were identical to those when working with hardwood. The task was possible to complete, but insufficient sharpness prolonged the time necessary to do so. The axe blade coped with the material, but the work required precision and patience. The handle was definitely too heavy for the work, which required holding the material being worked on with one hand. Working on the softened antler took 2 hours. Although the main goal was to study use-wear traces, performing this experiment allowed us to observe many technical issues of working with bronze axes, and it will help to design valuable studies in the future. Methodological conclusions are the following. Firstly, the work of the tool is very complex and many factors affect the final result, such as weight of the axe, proportions, blade geometry, type and method of the handle, one-handed or two-handed work, striking force, precision and user skills, and so on. To understand the individual detail, it would be necessary to design a series of experimental studies focused on specific issues, and eliminating the influence of other factors. Secondly, during the experiment, isolated traces were created. We were working with one material and did not perform any sharpening. Checking the possibility of verifying the traces should also be done on a specimen used for different purposes, as was probably done in the past, with the inclusion of sharpening. Technical conclusions are the following. Firstly, a narrow-bladed and long axe was not an optimal solution for working with wet wood. The axe tended to wedge, resulting in instability of the handle system. The opposite impression could be obtained regarding other materials. It worked well for precise wood processing, and especially for concentrating energy when in contact with hard materials, such as bone. Such properties, in turn, would emphasize the combat value of this form of axe. Secondly, the method and weight of the handle have significant effect on the efficiency of the axe, which is confirmed by other experiments conducted to this day. As for the handle, it proved to be durable, and any blade falling off was due to improper or inaccurate strikes, resulting in the handle coming into contact with the material being processed. Lastly, the eyelet played a small role, only proving useful as a way to prevent losing the axe in the brush, at least in this type of handle. The final step of our project was to compare use-wear created on replicas with traces from the artifacts. Even though we haven't gone through the whole database yet, we managed to find some noteworthy examples. Please keep in mind that socketed axes were multi-purpose tools, therefore artifacts bear traces of different activities. The following examples come from Kamil 1 and 3 hoards from southwestern Poland. Lines, both perpendicular and at an angle to the blade, and slight blunting on the edges, indicate work in wood. At the moment, it is difficult to distinguish between traces of work in wet and dry wood. Clear U-shaped notches on the blade are characteristic for work with a bone. Lines perpendicular to the blade and slight U-shaped notches might indicate work in an antler. Both the archaeological context and the results of our experiment suggest that the Lusatian socketed axe was a multifunctional tool of great symbolic importance to the communities of the Late Bronze Age. Lusatian axes are found in hoards and graves as well as in settlements. Regardless of their context of discovery, they usually bear traces of use. At present, we are unable to determine whether use and its intensity had an impact on decisions regarding deposition. However, it is clear that with the onset of the Late Bronze Age, the number of artifacts with poorly processed surfaces, showing production marks and casting defects, increases. This suggests that at this time, aesthetic issues took a backseat in favor of utilitarian function, despite the fact that Lusatian axes are always decorated. Thank you very much for your attention. We hope you enjoyed our presentation.